In this video, I want to show you all promising underdogs, the best inexpensive favorites, and the best bets to consider for this weekend. I'll also provide my final probability for each fighter's victory, along with their stat differentials. If you find this informative, helpful, or entertaining, please like and subscribe. It really helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me there. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier. The premium tier gives you early access to all of the analysis and results from my videos, along with the additional data analysis and stats. This includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and deep dives into each fighter's record and historical fights. So you'll get to see their strengths, their weaknesses, their consistency across different stats, and their stat comparisons versus all of their historical opponents' averages. All of this combined will help you with your picks and bets. There's a $20 a month tier, which is around $5 per event, and you can also purchase each of these separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping with the improvement and expansion of the content for this channel. Running this data, analysis, and prediction models takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you can show. And thank you to everyone who has shown me support recently. Also, if you like detailed breakdowns and predictions, I do those weekly for full cards as well, including prelim fights, so feel free to check those out on my channel. Let's go ahead and jump right in. First, let's take a look at promising underdogs. The fighters' names are on the leftmost column, followed by their probability of victory that I presented in the prediction video from earlier this week. These probabilities are not only based on several data science prediction models that are trained for accuracy, but also on qualitative information such as the fighter's momentum, their recent performances, their career's trajectory, psychological factors, their training camps, their weight cuts, and any other available information out there. I've also provided the stat advantages for each fighter compared to their opponent, excluding differentials where one of the fighters has a 0 in their stats in order to avoid misleading information. Alright, I've kept you guys waiting long enough. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first promising underdog that I want to highlight for you all in this very super interesting pay-per-view level card, please sense my sarcasm, it's none other than Tybura himself. I'm actually leaning towards him. He is a pick of mine going into this, so hear me out. Tybura does land 0.07 more strikes per minute than Spivac does. He absorbs 0.44 less strikes per minute. He has a 7% higher striking defense and a 10% higher takedown defense. Now, all things considered, including statistical and things outside of statistical analysis as well, such as qualitative factors, it's important to have a well-rounded pick. So all things considered, I'm giving Tybura a 50.2% probability of victory, and I want you to realize what that means. This fight is going to be very 50-50, but I am leaning towards the value fighter in that main event. I am being a little cautious with what I'm putting into this event because I think this event in particular is one of those weird fight nights where some of the people that shouldn't win will end up winning. It's not there might not be a lot of logic because what we've seen is these lower level fight cards. What happens a lot of the times is that the guy that we think logically will win just ends up with the loss somehow. So please be a little cautious coming into this card. Yeah, and I also want to mention that there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to this card. I think it has, what was it, about 4 fights that have been canceled or changed due to injuries, illnesses, or withdrawals, withdrawing, whatever the case may be. So anyways, back on topic, I'm giving Tybura a 50.2% probability of victory. I think he is a good underdog in this matchup. Keep in mind, he's won 25 fights. He's finished 64% of them. He's had 19 UFC fights, of which he's won 12. So that gives him a lot of experience and a pretty good winning percentage within the UFC itself. Recently, he's done well despite all the factors that are against him. He's won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win from earlier this year. So let's talk about those reasons that I think Tybura is going to win aside from just the stats alone. And I touched base a little bit on this on my prediction video, but I'm just going to dive in a little bit deeper. So I'm going to make my case here. Keep a couple things in mind when you're approaching this fight. First, I want you to realize that he does have a previous victory over Spivac. Yes, he did defeat Spivac once, and that was by unanimous decision, but this was 4 years ago, so just to add a little bit of context. But I still think that that first victory does provide a little bit of a psychological edge and a little bit of confidence coming into this fight. Also, like I mentioned, Tybura is a very experienced and veteran type of fighter. He is an 8-year UFC veteran. He has a very well-rounded skill set, and he's really able to adapt when it comes to his fighting style. And he leverages some of that experience, which I think when it comes to outmaneuvering a certain fighter, especially one like Spivac, I think this is where Tybura is probably going to excel in this fight. Also, based on that recent performance that he had, he looked to be in decent form, pretty good form. He's won 3 of his last 5 fights, so his recent win over Tai Tuivasa, which I know Tai Tuivasa was kind of on a slump anyways. We love the guy. We love Tai Tuivasa, no hate to him, but he was kind of struggling. So what I like to do is, I give you an opinion, I provide some context, and I also play a little bit of a devil's advocate take just to caution you going into the fight. I don't want to give you a false sense of confidence, especially when it comes to these fighters and these low-level fight night cards. But anyways, he does have really good submission techniques that he's displayed, even recently in the late stage of his career. He has good takedown defense as well. I think his rate is the higher 70%, if I remember correctly. He relies heavily on his grappling and his takedowns, and that really allows him to control fights when he's up against some of these opponents. He has a very balanced skill set too. I think he does really good with combining his striking, also utilizing the grappling and, using the defensive skills to stop his opponent. He combines all of those together, and I think he's going to be able to exploit weaknesses in Spivac's game because of that overall well-roundedness. Recently also, I feel like the older Tybura has gotten, the better he's gotten. He's kind of had this late career resurgence when it comes to his professional fighting career. So, and we've seen that with a lot of heavyweights now that I think about it. They kind of peak later on in their career as they get more experienced and maybe a little bit less aggressive and a little more strategic overall. We see that they do better later in their career. Also, I do like the durability and resilience that Tybura has as a fighter. We've seen him take some of those shots. We've only seen him get knocked out by fighters that have crazy speed and power. And honestly, looking at Spivac's previous fights and doing my studying, I don't think that Spivac's that kind of fighter that can kind of do immense damage and kind of just destroy Tybura. No. Again, it's 50-50. I think that there is a chance that Spivac could control the fight and get a decision victory. But just keep in mind, I do think that Tybura is very durable and resilient as a fighter, and I think that plays an important role in his probability percentage in winning. These are the things that the odds makers can't pick up on. That's why I love doing my research and analysis when I arrive at my final probability and pick percentages. So if you are also leaning towards Tybura, I think that he holds value in this fight. I like him as a fighter over Spivac. I think he holds a lot of advantages physically, mentally, and even strategically, with his well-roundedness. I like Tybura in this fight, so you could take him as moneyline, or if you want to be a little bit more, risky, you could take Tybura via decision. We are going to review bets at the end of this video, but I just want to give you guys that overall conclusion. All right, let's get hype, everyone. The next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you all is none other than Chelsea Chandler. Chelsea Chandler has a height advantage of 2 inches. She's 1 year younger than her opponent, and she lands 0.2 more takedowns on average. She also is 7% more accurate with her takedowns. So I ended up giving Chelsea Chandler a 52.4% probability of victory. I think she's a really good underdog, and she has a pretty decent chance of pulling off the upset here. She's won 6 fights. She's finished half of them. She's had 3 UFC fights, of which she's won 2, so not doing too bad so far. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off a win into this fight. The last time she lost was back in July of 2023. And let me talk about those reasons aside from stats alone as to why Chandler has a decent chance of winning here. I really like Chandler's grappling heavy style when it comes to fighting, and recently with her UFC success, I think that her physical advantages do give her the upper hand against a fighter like Yana Santos. I think Chandler has a really good ability to control fights, especially when it comes to those ground matches, and that really goes well against Santos' striking-focused approach. I touched base on this a little bit in my prediction video, but what do you get when you have a striker versus a pretty promising grappler? You end up getting a grappler who controls the fight and is able to get a unanimous decision victory. And of course, it's a snooze fest, respectfully, but that's what ends up shaking out from that kind of matchup more times than it doesn't. I'm not saying that's 100% of the time, but Chandler does have a good ability to control fights. I think that while Santos has more experience as a fighter and she's faced better opponents, Chandler's momentum and her youth are really going to be on her side today in this fight card. So I think she has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to Santos. And again, the purpose of this video is to highlight value for you guys. So if you guys agree with me, consider taking it. If not, that's okay. We can talk about the next fight. No worries at all. I don't take anything personally. So I will be taking Chandler via decision. I am taking her over the favorite. So the next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you guys is Toshiomi Kazuma. And I think that this is actually going to be a pretty interesting fight. He is the 5-year younger fighter. He has a reach advantage of 2 inches in this matchup. He lands a little bit more strikes per minute. I mean, very slightly more strikes per minute. He has a 14% higher striking accuracy, which is huge. And he absorbs 1.62 less strikes per minute. So all things considered, I ended up giving Kazuma a 39% probability of victory. And when you think about an underdog, and when you look at those odds, that does show some value for Kazuma. And again, I'm working with what I have available in a card like this, so please bear with me. I know that some of these underdogs or favorites might not be very interesting, but that's more of a reflection of the kind of card this is than this video. So, you know, just be a little bit kind. So, all right, let's talk about Kazuma's statistical advantages over his opponent here. So, he has won 10 fights. He's finished 80% of them, so he has a pretty good finishing rate in the UFC. He's also had 3 UFC fights, so he has a decent amount of experience for a younger fighter. He's won 1 of those, though, so keep that in mind. That's probably what makes him a little bit risky. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of back-to-back losses here. But I don't think he's the kind of fighter who can carry, like, multiple losses. I think he has potential here, and I'm going to talk about why. I think personally that he has the upper hand over Charalampos Gregorio in specific aspects. I'm still leaning towards Gregorio because remember, if I'm giving Kazuma a 40% probability of victory, then that means I'm giving Gregorio about a 60%. But 40% for an underdog. And let's look at where his line's at right now. Toshiomi Kazuma is at a plus 188. Gregorio's at negative 223. That holds some value there. And if you have a 40% probability of victory and you have certain stylistic aspects going for you and you're willing to roll the dice a little bit, then Kazuma has a little bit of value. So here's the thing. Charalampos Gregorio, we all know he's a pretty decent striker. Especially if you do your research and do some fight film watching, you can pick out that Gregorio has some striking advantages in regular fights. But Kazuma, where he kind of stands out, he's particularly good when it comes to grappling and submissions. And what we've noticed that statistics might not always pick up is that some of those guys that have striking advantages, those advantages tend to get a little bit neutralized when they're up against an opponent that's good with grappling and submissions. Kazuma's extensive training, especially when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and his experience against good opponents do give him some key tools that I think can exploit some of Gregorio's weaknesses, especially if he can take the fight to the ground and kind of try to get some control. Not only that, but Kazuma is very precise when it comes to striking as well, and I want to highlight that. His striking skills aren't bad. His technical skills in both stand-up and ground game is really what I think gives him a decent chance of winning here. And Gregorio, if you notice the way he fights, he kind of relies on more of an aggressive style. He has a very aggressive striking style. Kazuma, on the other hand, he's able to mix up his attacks, and he kind of keeps his opponents guessing when it comes to the fight. And I think that that's a very key component to his fight game. We've also seen through Kazuma's previous fight experiences, he is an adaptable fighter overall. I also like his mental toughness. He's overcame a lot of injuries, and I think that that's built maybe some resilience in him as a fighter. He truly is a fighter. He knows what it takes, and he's willing to play the game. He's also kind of accurate as a fighter compared to Gregorio. Gregorio is not as accurate. Again, we reviewed the stats, but I think that this particular stat does bleed into a stylistic and qualitative analysis about him. He's not as accurate with his striking, so we could see something of a dynamic where Kazuma is slowly taking more control of a fight as the fight continues to go on. He has pretty decent defensive skills too. Gregorio is a little bit better when it comes to defense, at least from what I've been able to pick up. I'm going to try to wrap this up. Sorry for going a little bit too in depth for these fights and expanding a lot on them. But I really love talking about this stuff, and I love kind of sharing my thoughts and insights on fights. So I hope you guys appreciate some of that. But I'm going to wrap it up. I think that Kazuma, he's faced a couple of losses coming into this fight, and I think that's going to further add to his motivation and urgency as a fighter to get a victory back on his record and start building some momentum. So if you like Kazuma's fight game and you think that he holds some key advantages over Gregorio, and maybe this is his time where he flips the script and gets a victory, you could take Kazma via decision. Just keep in mind that might be a little bit of a risky decision, especially given a 40% probability, but with that plus 188, that's not necessarily a bad decision. So it's up to you to evaluate. Maybe you were already leaning towards Kazma as an underdog. If you were, take this as a confirmation of sorts. And if you weren't and you totally disagree with me, that's okay. I'm just trying to highlight some value when it comes to what the statistics are showing and what stylistically I think are advantageous for an underdog. With that being said, my friends, the next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you all on today's card is Talita Alencar. Talita lands 1.5 more takedowns on average than her opponent here. All things considered, I'm giving Talita a 41.3% probability of victory, and that's a statistical analysis plus research outside of statistics as well. I think she's a decent underdog who has a chance of pulling off an upset here. She has a pretty decent probability. I mean, 40% is pretty high for an underdog, which is why I want to highlight her as a potential underdog on this card. So recently, she's won 5 fights. She's finished 60% of those, and the one UFC fight that she has had, she won that one UFC fight. So she has some pretty decent momentum. She's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off a win into this fight. So on paper, all of that looks really good. But let's talk about some of those strategic and stylistic advantages that she'll have over Stephanie Luciano in this fight. For starters, Alencar is known for her exceptional grappling skills, especially when it comes to her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In their previous encounter, and yes, this is a rematch, Alencar dominated when it came to the grappling exchanges, and she controlled the first 2 rounds when it came to the fight being on the ground. She's really good with securing those takedowns and maintaining top control, which I think might be crucial when it comes to Luciano's striking advantage in this fight. She also has good experience and conditioning overall as a fighter. She got that split decision victory over Ryan Amanda, and I think that that extra fight likely improved her conditioning and provided some more recent fight experience for her, which is probably a bit of an advantage as well when it comes to fight readiness and her overall endurance. She's also a pretty adaptable fighter, and strategically she does certain things that help position her to get a victory, or it just positions her favorably. For example, if she's doing really good early on and then the fight starts kind of fading away from her, she's still able to pull off something like a draw, for example, because of her performance in the early rounds. So I think that in this rematch, she's probably going to manage her energy much better and avoid gassing out a little bit, which will probably help her maintain control throughout this fight. Now, I know I mentioned that her conditioning is good. I'm trying to say that I believe her conditioning has improved. I'm not saying that she's always had good conditioning. I'm saying that her experience is contributing to her conditioning getting better and better, which will be a factor in this fight. She's also going to constantly have the submission threat when it comes to this fight. She has a pretty good track record of securing wins via submission, especially, I think she's had a few victories. Let me fact check real quick. Yeah, she's had 3 victories via submission. So that's going to be a constant threat in this fight as well. I think that overall, her camp probably focused on some tactical improvements in this fight, which I think the odds are being a little bit unfair towards her. So I wanted to highlight some value that she has in this particular card. She also has shown some versatility when it comes to her game plan. She mixes those takedowns in. She mixes a little bit of striking with that. And I know striking is not her main strength, but she does incorporate everything to have a versatile game plan. So she could keep Stephanie guessing a little bit and create some of those openings that she'll look to exploit, whether it's on the feet a little bit or especially on the ground. So just to summarize, I like Alencar's grappling dominance in this fight. I think that she's improved her conditioning a bit. She is an adaptable fighter, so keep that in mind. The submission threat is going to be looming against her opponent here. She has very likely made some tactical improvements as she's gained experience and even had a fight in between her previous fight against Stephanie. She probably has a little bit of a psychological edge coming into this fight. She's going to manage her energy a little bit better. And I think she'll have a versatile game plan and utilize her striking a little bit along with her grappling, which she's more dominant in. So all things considered, if you do want to roll the dice a little bit, and it's kind of difficult with women's MMA, so you must be really hunting for some value here, but you could take Alencar via decision. Or if you do want to be a little bit safe, you could take the neutral route and take the fight going the distance or over 1.5 over 2.5. Again, I'm going to talk about bets at the end of this video here, but I just wanted to kind of summarize with that. Alright, now we're going to switch gears, and now I'm going to talk about the promising favorites for this card, which I've chosen through three main criteria. First, they have a high statistical weighted confidence either through my prediction models or through fighter stat evaluation or some combination of both. Second, their opponent does not have a high probability of victory, so you're not going to notice any overlap between the underdogs I just showed you earlier and these fighters. And the third thing is that their odds aren't too expensive. If a fighter has like negative 600 or negative 700 odds, they're obviously just too expensive to pick, but you could always parlay them if you want. In this video, I'm going to focus more on finding you guys some value rather than just stating some obvious picks and pointing out those negative 600 type fighters. So I consider these three things for you guys. I do all the work for you guys, and then I show you the valuable picks that fit that criteria. And if you want to know how I predict each fight plays out and the results, please check out my prediction breakdown from earlier this week where I review stats, each fighter's fight history, the results of my 7 data science prediction models, my final picks, and the method of victory. Now for this portion of the video for these favorites, I'm only going to review their stat differentials that they have against their opponent. But again, if you want those in-depth breakdowns, please refer to that video from earlier this week. It will help you out. So the first inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to talk about with you guys is Mariscal. So Mariscal is 5 years younger as a fighter. He lands 1.7 more strikes per minute, and he has an 11% higher striking accuracy. He also has a little bit of a better striking defense, but I mean, it's a very small amount of a difference. But I do want to highlight that he has a 26% higher takedown defense, which is also key. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Mariscal a confident 65% probability of victory, and I think it's going to be a great favorite on this card. You could throw him in a parlay if you want, take the money line, however you please. I think that Mariscal is a good fighter on this card. So the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Danny Barlow. Danny Barlow has a height advantage of 1 inch. He's 5 years younger. He has a reach advantage of 5 inches. He lands 5.33 more strikes per minute. He has a slightly better striking defense and a 50% higher takedown defense. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Danny a 70.5% probability of victory. I like his advantages as a fighter in this matchup, and I think that he has a great chance of pulling off a victory. So he's kind of the safer pick on this type of card. Another favorite that I really liked on this card is Karol Rosa. Karol Rosa is 3 younger than her opponent. She has a reach advantage of 1 inch. She lands 1.6 more strikes per minute. She has a 8% higher striking accuracy. She lands 0.76 more takedowns on average. She has a 12% higher takedown accuracy and a 2% higher takedown defense. There's a lot of advantages she holds, not only on paper, but even stylistically. And if you want to see that in-depth analysis, check out my prediction video from earlier this week where I really break down each fight, especially when it comes to my pick. So I ended up giving Karol Rosa a 62.3% probability of victory, and I think she really is a good favorite to feature. But be a little bit careful, because in women's MMA, you think one fighter's going to win and you end up getting disappointed. I thought Dudakova was going to win. She didn't end up winning, so I was disappointed. So approach this a little bit cautiously, but I do like Rosa overall. The next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you all is Carl Williams. Carl Williams has a 4% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 2.22 less strikes per minute. He has a 15% higher striking defense and a 20% higher takedown defense as well. All things considered, I'm giving him a 65% probability of victory, and I think he's also a good fighter that I feel fairly confident in to get a victory on this type of card. And lastly, the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Youssef Zalal. Youssef Zalal is 2 years younger. He has a 3% better striking accuracy. He absorbs 1.63 less strikes per minute, which is key. He has a 2% higher striking defense and a 32% higher takedown defense, and he lands 1 more submission on average than his opponent here. All things considered, I'm giving him a 68% probability of victory, and I think he's also another solid fighter that you can't really go wrong with when it comes to this card. Now let's review the bets that I think have value for this card and have a good statistical and stylistic possibility of happening. Please disregard prop bets where you're picking the other fighter to win. I'll start from the top of the card and work my way down. You'll see that I've laid out a few options for you guys depending on how risk averse you are and how much risk you're willing to take. So this card's changed a lot, so let's just kind of go over what we have in opportunities here. So for Tybura versus Spivac, I would take, if you're leaning towards Spivac, which I know a lot of people are, honestly, Spivac, you could take him via KO/TKO. You could also take him via decision. It just depends on what you think he's going to be able to finish with. I think he's capable of pulling off of both of those. But if you're like me and trying to give the underdog a chance here, I am leaning towards Tybura. You should take him via decision if you like him. For the next card, This one's changed. We don't have Javid Basharat. I do like Chris Gutierrez in this new matchup, and I am pretty confident in him. You could kind of sprinkle him on a parlay, but be a little bit careful overall on that one. Next, we have Damon Jackson versus Mariscal. I would take Mariscal via KO/TKO or decision, again, depending on how you think he's going to be able to pull that off. You could also take him with money line. I don't like any of the other round bets or anything like that for that particular matchup. For Yana Santos versus Chelsea Chandler, consider the over 1.5, over 2.5, or the fight going the distance, depending on how much risk you want to take out of those three. You can't really go wrong with women's MMA going the distance, depending on what kind of fighter you're talking about. You have fighters like Joanna Jacek. Sometimes that's a little bit risky if you think that a fight with her is going to go the distance, but some of those end up do going the distance. Regardless, you can't really go wrong with taking a women's MMA fight going the distance. So that would be my take on that fight. Steer clear of anything else. For Nikolay Veretennikov versus Danny Barlow, consider taking Barlow via KO/TKO. Or if you'd like to be a little bit more neutral, you could take the fight not going the distance. If you want to play a little bit safer, or I'm sorry, a little bit more aggressive, you could do the under 2.5 or under 1.5. So it just depends on how risk averse you are in this card. And I do want you all to approach this card a little bit cautiously. So for Alan Nascimento versus Rafael Filho, that one I believe was canceled, so I'm gonna fly over that one. For Toshiyama Kazuma versus Charalampos Gregorio, if you're leaning towards Gregorio, you could take him via KO/TKO. Regardless, I think if you have a neutral stance, you could take the fight not going the distance. And if you want to play a little bit aggressive, you could do the under 2.5 or under 1.5. For Carol Rosa versus Pani Kianzad, you could consider, again, the over 1.5, over 2.5, or the fight going the distance. I'm not really going to take a money line on that kind of thing. Again, women's MMA, be a little bit cautious about that. Can't go wrong with a fight going the distance, especially because neither of them is a real big finisher. So next we have Jonathan Denise versus Carl Williams. If you're leaning towards Williams, consider taking him via decision. If you're leaning towards Denise, consider taking him actually via KO/TKO. And that's it for that fight. I don't really like any of the round situations because you have one fighter where the fight could just go the distance and he kind of controls it. You have the other fighter who could just land that KO/TKO. So be a little bit cautious about that. There's a lot of strategy, preparation, and research that goes into these. So I hope you guys find this useful and helpful when it comes to making your picks, or even entertaining. If you're just someone like me who likes to listen to how fights are going to play out and stuff like that, this is really for anyone who just loves UFC and loves predicting fights or analyzing fights, listening about fights, all of that. Anyways, let's keep going. So I think now we're at Yusuf Zalal versus Aarons. And so when it comes to that fight, you could take Zalal via decision or you could take Zalal via submission. He does have a really good submission skill set under his belt as well. So you could take either of those depending on how you want the fight to go. You could also take the money line if you don't want to specifically pick a way that fight's going to go and you don't want to roll the dice a little bit too much. But if you do, there is a little bit more of a reward. So just keep that in mind. I'm just highlighting what all my research points to. And lastly, we have Stephanie Luciano versus Talita Alencar. And for that fight, if you're considering Alencar, you could take her via decision. You could also, to play it safe, take the over 1.5, over 2.5, or the fight going the distance. I had someone in the comments say he's taken all the women's MMA fights going the distance in this fight card, and he's parlaying those. And I don't think you could go wrong with something like that either, especially for these matchups. Remember, the name of the game is understanding how much you're willing to risk for what type of reward and how confident you are in your own analysis, and using some of my research as a confirmation as well. That's the name of the game. Also, you could take my picks and randomize some 2 or 3 leg parlays. I like to do that and kind of sprinkle that around. I found that if you do those lower leg type of parlays, they end up hitting more times than they don't. Obviously statistics, but I do like that those yield some pretty good benefits when you pair those fighters together like that. There's a ton of ways that you can leverage all my research and analysis and my picks and my, those bets that I highlight for you guys. There's a ton of way that you could leverage those into a strategy and try to profit off of some of these cards. So I hope that this stuff is really helpful for you guys. I love sharing everything that I'm able to research with you guys and just being very transparent. And with that said, that wraps up this video. I really appreciate you all for watching and being so supportive as always. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and check out that Patreon if you want to support me through there as well. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which includes early results, picks, and bets, and also includes premium data, analysis, and stats as well. Your support helps keep me encouraged and motivated to continue running all of this data and analysis for you guys and providing you guys all these insights. So thank you once again, and as always, see you guys in the next one.